All right, well, here we are again.
Hi.
Another reaction video, and this time we're going to be looking at a couple small videos with William Lane Craig, and he's obviously a very prominent Christian figure in the world, and even online too. Definitely as an academic in philosophy and also in theology or New Testament studies. And actually part of his, I don't know if you know this, but part of his philosophical study, he did look at medieval Islamic philosophy. So he does have some awareness of Islam for sure on an academic level, but in a different way than we would be focusing. We don't focus on the philosophical aspects. And we really think it's a distraction and not the right way to focus conversations with Muslims in a way that will be productive and persuasive and ultimately evangelistically effective, which is what our aim is. So since he's got a very prominent voice, a lot of people follow him and respect what he has to say. We think it's very vital that we give our own thoughts based on what he says.
Robinson asks, is there any evidence in the Quran about the resurrection of Jesus?
Not that I know of, because one of the most remarkable things about the Quran's testimony to Jesus is that it denies Jesus' crucifixion. I find this to be the Achilles heel, frankly, of Islam, is that the one historical fact about Jesus of Nazareth that is universally acknowledged by all critics today, even the most skeptical, is that Jesus of Nazareth was executed by crucifixion by the Romans. And yet the Quran says, or denies, this one indisputable fact. It says they did not kill him, neither did they crucify him, but it only appeared to them so. And so it's tremendously embarrassing, I think, for the Muslim that this record denies the one historical fact about Jesus that is indisputable, that everyone agrees to. And I think that when you reflect on this, it shows again that when you're dealing with the New Testament documents, you are dealing with documents that are primitive primary sources out of the first century during the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, compared to a document written in Arabia 6 centuries after the event, with no independent historical source of information for the life of Jesus. And therefore it's not surprising that in the Quran we would have these factual mistakes and legends about Jesus that aren't characteristics of the primitive primary sources.
Oh, there's a lot we can say about that.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you give your initial thoughts there, Alex?
Sure. First of all, apart from William Lane Craig, it's the first, it's kind of funny to see somebody smoking in the pipe.
Oh,
Well,
sure.
yeah, well, from that point on, so William Lane Craig said it's embarrassing for Muslims or for Islam to deny. I mean, it's been 1400 years plus, and Islam denies crucifixion since the inception, and doesn't embarrass
I guess
anyone.
embarrassing to who?
Yeah, I don't know, like from our perspective, yeah, but they don't see that.
I think he's saying from a Western historical critical academic perspective, but
Okay.
do they really care about that?
Yeah, especially academics.
Right.
Sure, they won't. And then he said, of course, it's one and indisputable fact about crucifixion. Again, it's for us as indisputable facts. Even Bart Ehrman said, yes, okay, fine, but Muslims using Bart Ehrman against Bible all the time, especially New Testament, I'm sure.
Well, I would actually say a different way to frame that is it's indisputable, but it's not relevant, because what is the fact that we're talking about? That someone who everybody thought was Jesus of Nazareth was crucified and died on a cross under Pontius Pilate.
Mm-hmm.
All Muslims can agree to that. I mean,
Yeah.
other than the Ahmadis, they're not going to say he didn't. They're going to say he didn't die. But everybody else can say, Muslims included, that yeah, he was put on the cross. Unless they deny that anybody was put on the cross that looked like Jesus. But that's kind of bizarre. So normally that's not the case. Normally they're going to have some sort of swapping substitutionary theory where somebody was made to look like Jesus and was crucified, or that Jesus survived the cross, or however they're going to explain it. But any of those explanations is going to be compatible with what the Christians are going to argue historically, and any non-Christian is going to argue historically. So how do you differentiate the Islamic account of that on a historical basis from what everybody else is saying? I don't see how you can differentiate that. You have to do that based on theology.
Yeah, right. It's because in the Quran it said it's appeared to them they crucified. So yeah.
Yeah. So what is the historical record gonna record? Jesus of Nazareth was crucified.
Yeah.
So okay, well, lo and behold, that's what we see.
Yeah.
And guess what? That supports both claims. Okay, like it's consistent with both claims, but it's not proving the one against the other.
Yeah.
And that's what, okay, if Muslims wanted to have historical evidence outside of the Quranic revelation to support distinctively the claim in the Quran, they don't have it. Okay, but the point is, we don't have it either. Right? So it's funny, all these debates that Christians and Muslims have about was Jesus crucified or the crucifixion of Jesus, really it's just an invitation for Muslims to attack the Christian faith and nothing else. Like, because they essentially, what is it? Heads, the Muslim wins. Tails, loses. Right? the Christian has to lose.
Yeah,
because
no way.
Because all it does is open up to suspicion, even if that suspicion isn't really legitimate historically. Okay, it just opens it up for that. And other than that, like, the Muslim's not going to walk away with any evidence that goes against distinctively what they can explain from the Quran.
If they believe the Quran is true word of God, then why they should budge to any other explanation rather than the Quran, right?
Yeah, it's just like I think Christians are not seeing that there isn't evidence that distinctively goes against what the Quranic view is. If you were to presuppose the Quranic view, the historical record is going to look the same.
Yeah, and you cannot blame the Quran or out of the Quran to make a grievous mistake about crucifixion using crucifixion account. Okay. It's something I never seen anybody done it. I mean, like, and I could tell with my own experience. Well, I'm talking. I used to talk to Muslims about it, or I hear people talking with Muslims about it, going absolutely nowhere. As a matter of fact, well, I think it's it's not necessarily crucifixion, but at least Trinity. When Sheikh Uthman was meeting with David Wood and other guys under Anthony Rogers, and it was, I think, 2 hours of Trinity. I mean, again, about Jesus, right? So, and it went nowhere at all. So why even bother to go that way if there is a better way to go, right?
Right.
So that's our approach.
Yeah, so he sees it as the Achilles heel of Islam. This is like the one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we can think of hundreds, actually thousands of things. Well, I think the details in the stories, right?
Yeah, I think the Achilles heel, then you have to say it's an Adam. And
well, he said that the fundamental difference is about I don't know how he phrased it, but the foundational differences between our views of Jesus, and yeah, to your point, it's Adam, not Jesus.
Oh, yeah, that's the main one.
And specifically original sin.
Oh yeah, that's number one for sure.
Yeah, and so Christians have to understand.
But Achilles heel is something else. What we offer, it's a comparison of the stories and mixture of the stories, misunderstanding of the stories of the Old Testament prophets, that's Achilles heel of Islam. And
Actually, interesting. You might not know this, is that William Lane Craig more recently is denying original sin.
no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, it'll be interesting to watch.
So that wasn't informing him when he's saying that statement then, but now, and I'm with him on an aspect of it. I don't believe in original guilt, which is the idea that Adam's guilt is inherited by his offspring.
Mm-hmm.
But original sin, in the sense of there is an inheritance of corruption, that it corrupts our condition.
And the consequence.
Clearly, Genesis says there's a curse that comes upon the earth and the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, like, that's indisputable that it says that. Now, Craig has also, in the last few years, been focused on his writing about Adam and origins.
Okay.
And he's taken more of a, let's say, a theistic evolutionary position.
Okay.
And yeah, I know, it's like, and he thinks that especially the first 11 chapters of Genesis, it's like amazing that they lumped the whole thing, like 11 chapters, not like the first 2 or 3. The first 11 are he says mytho-history.
Okay.
So he says there's an aspect of historical truth to it, but it is also couched in mythical stuff. So, I mean, we're not even on the same page with him with that kind of stuff. So it shows when Christians and apologists, like, he's not somebody who's going to defend that kind of, like, the reliability of what Genesis really says.
Yeah.
He's going to take issue with me saying that, but, like, the obvious way to take it is not his way. And he ridicules traditional views on that. So I'm actually kind of, we should do something. I'm going to probably do some video on him on that topic, but just to say, he's kind of one among many, even apologists, Christian apologists, who are just kind of, let's just say, I'm going to put it this way, they're discarding the need to defend the Old Testament at all. And especially Genesis, and especially the first 11 chapters.
Yeah.
And so once you do that, I mean, yeah, what have you got left?
You destroy foundation. And
yeah.
Anyway, next thing I just wrote down is he said the primary source is not New Testament, written by the eyewitness account, and the Quran is like 6 centuries later. That again, that's.
Did you say the Quran is centuries? Oh, centuries after the events of Jesus.
Yeah. So again, it's a Christian view, it's a scholarly view. It's not how the Muslims look at it. So therefore, whatever he's talking about the Achilles heel of Islam, it's just a blind shot.
I think it was frozen there for a second, so I'm not sure if you heard me, but I was saying, I think he meant that the Quran was hundreds of years after Jesus, not after Muhammad.
Yeah. Did I say Muhammad?
No, I don't know. I didn't. I maybe missed it.
600 years after New Testament.
Yeah.
He said, why should we trust that account? Well,
I think the main issue is he's trying to reason from a historical critical method, and Muslims aren't doing that. Right? Muslims are using a different standard of epistemology for their judgment, how they're judging
100
things.
years almost, right?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, God said it. Trump's trying to figure out the best explanation of the available evidence about historical things, right? Of course, I'm with the historical side of things. That's how I want to reason about things historically. If we knew that the Quran was revelation, sure, okay, that would trump it. But the Muslims are presupposing that. And Craig, as are many Christian apologists, are who are more evidentialist, would be reasoning historically, like thinking that, like Muslims are gonna do the same thing, right? Like we have to call them to the same standard as we're doing, academically, historically, and every Muslim's gonna basically they should be fair-minded and accept that, right? that's the thinking, but the reality is they don't feel a burden of proof,
Oh, for
right?
sure. Yeah.
Whereas we're saying we all have the burden of proof. We're making a claim. Okay, so we're going to look for the evidence. We're not presupposing our view. So they're not doing that, though. They are presupposing their view, and they need evidence to refute it. So it's not they don't feel like they need evidence to establish it. They already think it's established, right? And so it's a different burden of proof that essentially that you and I we're operating differently, because we're saying we're actually accepting we're operating on their terms, right?
Yeah, and of course, before we will prove anything about Jesus, we have to disprove Quranic view on anything and everything, including but not limited to the New Testament issues.
Yeah, and I mean, essentially, if we can disprove the Quran, then we can kind of adopt more like what Craig is saying, which is we can reason historically about evidence about Jesus and the New Testament and stuff. But until the Quran is out of the picture, we're talking about two totally different standards of evidence and burdens of proof.
Sure. Okay, let's move to another clip.
Yeah.
Good morning, Bill. Welcome to Peoria again. I have a question for you. There's a great migration going on in the world of Muslims from closed countries into Western Europe, into the United States. I know you've worked in Muslim countries before. What do you believe is the best way to share your faith with those that are coming from a Muslim background?
In sharing our faith with Muslims, which I really enjoy, I love talking with Muslims, I think that the key is to focus on Jesus of Nazareth, his identity and his claims. Don't criticize Muhammad. Don't get their backs up by attacking their prophet. I wouldn't even quibble about the Quran and errors in the Quran versus the Bible. Focus on Jesus. You know, Paul says that Jesus is the stumbling stone. He's the stumbling stone for both Jews and for Gentiles. And it's the same with Muslims. It is who Jesus was and what he claimed that divides Islam fundamentally from Christianity. And here, the evidence is just all on the Christian side. I mean, the one indisputable fact about Jesus of Nazareth that is recognized by every historical scholar is that Jesus died by crucifixion at the hands of the Romans. And yet, this is the one historical fact about Jesus that the Quran denies. The Muslim does not believe that Jesus was crucified. In the Quran, it says they did not kill him, neither did they crucify him, but it was only made to appear to them so. And so, this just makes the Quran historically indefensible. And in my experience, sharing your faith with a Muslim is very much like sharing your faith with a Jehovah's Witness. It will be the same verses, the same passages that you will use, because the Jehovah's Witness also denies that Jesus is the Son of God, denies the deity of Christ, and so you'll share passages with the Jehovah's Witness that shows that Jesus made claims whereby he put himself in the place of God himself. And then also you've got the evidence for the crucifixion and the resurrection. And I think this presents a very, very powerful case for thinking that the Christian view of Jesus is correct in contrast to the Muslim view. And it puts the focus where it should be. It puts the focus on Jesus.
So should we focus on Jesus, Alex?
Nope.
Absolutely not.
No way.
So, like, we kind of say that's the last thing to focus on.
We finished with Jesus, but we never started with Jesus.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah, I often say to people, like, we can't talk about Jesus because at the beginning or in the middle. We got to go to the end, because he is the ultimate culmination of all the revelation that's in the biblical scriptures. So we have to start essentially at the beginning and build up to him, not start with him.
Mhm.
Like starting with the end of the story and you don't know any of the, right? Like
Yeah.
tuning in to the last minute of the movie and you don't have no idea what the movie's about.
It's like let's say, for argument's sake, that Lord of the Rings, you
Mhm.
watch the third part before even, and you don't know what happened in the first and second, right?
Right.
So will it work? Not really. You won't understand, right? Yeah. So I had this meeting once at the masjid, we'll call it like Ahmadiyya, or how my Sunnis friend call them, Qadianis. Actually, in his office at Maple area,
Mhm.
the main one, and we chat for a while about like a topic I try to present, like a Torah and a Quran, right? So we spent a couple of hours talking. But he tried to always move to the New Testament, and well, I realized we're going nowhere. So before we parted, he presented me a book to read. He asked me, "Could you please read?" I said, "I look at the table of content, and I saw, let's say, I don't remember, it was like 10 chapters. I said, is it okay for me to read 5 chapters only, the last 5?" In the beginning, he said, "Oh yeah, sure," but then he said, "No, well, how can you go from the back at the end, right? From the middle to the end. You should read from the beginning." I said, "That's exactly my point."
Mhm.
So when I ask you to, well, let's talk about from the beginning of the Bible, from Genesis, from the Torah onwards, and then hopefully we'll have enough time to talk about Jesus. But you refuse it. So that was kind of interesting experience when he refuted his own logical, what he thinks, argument.
Mhm.
And by the problem I think here we see like many Christians, almost everybody, meeting with Muslim any sort or any kind, they will speak about Christ all the time. So when suddenly out of the blue, the same Muslim meeting us, and we refused to talk about Christ, they became like really puzzled. And many times, either online or in person, when I talk to Muslims, they said, "Are you Jew or who are you? Are you Christian or Jew?"
Right,
Because
because we're talking about the Old Testament. Yeah.
yeah, we talk about Old Testament, but I never hear anything said about Paul or
And
Christ.
what Christian talks about the Old Testament? Right.
Yeah, with the Muslim. Yeah, so that was interesting experience. That's why we don't start with Christ. It's not what do you call it? It's not our main focus in the beginning of the talking to Muslims, because we're gonna go nowhere. And definitely when he said it is a stumbling stone, yes, sure, for Jews and Gentiles. And for the
Mhm.
Muslims, yeah, definitely, but it's not one we start with. And how you usually say, the Muslims are actually modified Jews, right? So they are, the Islam is based on rabbinical Pharisaical Judaism,
Right. Yeah.
and Pharisaical rabbinical Judaism is basically post-Christian religion,
Yeah.
response to destruction of the temple, to the Christian claims about Yeshua HaMashiach. So it's both of them became the post-Christians, which
It's at least in its foundations
yeah,
post like
exactly,
biblical in the sense of post Old Testament,
yeah.
and uh, it's not biblical. I think that's
Mhm.
really what we want to say is it's not rabbinical Judaism is not biblical or Old Testament Judaism.
Yeah.
And yes, you're right. A lot of it also developed after the time of the New
Mhm.
Testament as well. Yeah.
So that's why we can't really say that when you start with Christ, it will make any headways with the Muslims, because
Yeah,
we've
and
never done it.
I think a lot of Christians understand. Certainly, when I talk to them, and I think I think William Lane Craig would understand too. Is that if you're talking to a religious Jew, a rabbinical Jew today,
Mhm.
what are you going to be looking at mostly?
Old Testament.
Old Testament. So you're not gonna need to argue for the existence of God.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, he may mistakenly think that you should be focusing on Jesus's claims and the resurrection,
Hmm.
but actually, there's a I think he was a New Testament biblical scholar who was a rabbinical Jewish rabbi,
Hmm.
Pinchas Lapid. and I forget when he passed away, but not too many years ago. I think maybe the 90s or 2000s.
Okay.
And he concluded from his study of the evidence we find, especially in the New Testament, that Jesus was probably raised from the dead. But he didn't leave rabbinical Judaism and become a Messianic Jew.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, just evidence for the resurrection of Jesus is not enough. And it's not enough because the reason that Christians don't understand that, I think, is because they don't understand rabbinical Judaism. It's not simply Old Testament minus Jesus. It is oral Torah. It is all of the rabbinical traditions and theology, which is really undercuts so much of the theology of the actual Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. Much of their theology is actually founded in the Midrash, the stories, the Midrash Haggadah, not just Midrash Halakha, which is what most people think when they think of what's authoritative for them. But their narratives that define their theology is really from the Midrash Haggadah. And nobody's really talking about that. And so I think actually, because Christian apologists have mischaracterized or wrongly estimated what is when they wrongly assessing rabbinical Judaism. That is also a really major basis for why they're not rightly assessing Islam and how to approach it, because
Even Islam, right?
As you were just saying, Islam is really founded from the influence of rabbinical Jews on Muhammad and the Quran and its formation.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's our contention and that's our theory, and that's what we're going to argue for, and we do. But if that is really the case, then the focus should really be more Old Testament compared to the Quran, not New Testament.
Yeah.
And one of the major foundations, as we said, is original sin. That's the real foundational difference.
It's a real foundation.
Original sin is also denied by rabbinical Judaism, as is the blood atonement and the substitutionary atonement system, as is theophanies. That's all denied in rabbinical Judaism and in Islamic theology.
Yes.
So
and of course
how can I talk about an incarnation? Yeah. And someone dying for another person if they deny all those things.
Yeah, foundation. And plus, they believe, both of them, like the rabbinical Jews and the Muslims, believe that prophets are sinless. So that's another big issue we could find.
Or virtually sinless or righteous.
Close enough.
I think rabbinical Jews might not always accept the description of sinless. I think they would say that's too far. A lot of rabbinical Jews would say, "Oh no!" Like if you hear rabbis talking, they'll talk about the sinful characteristics of the people, the Old Testament characters. But if you read the Midrash Haggadah and you read actually not just that their theology, right, by Orthodox rabbis, that isn't the case. That really those sins in the text in the Hebrew Bible, those sins are mostly whitewashed. They're explained away.
Exactly.
Because of the presupposition, like you're saying, that they're basically maybe not sinless, but they are righteous.
Yeah,
right.
That's true. That's a good word. Another thing, William Lane Craig, I think, mistakenly said, like, the Muslims are like a Jehovah's Witness. And we should deal with this is a major...
all the same argument. He uses all the same arguments.
Yeah. Like, well, wait a minute. There is a fundamental difference. Yes, the Jehovah's Witness, they have their own translation of the Bible. Okay, fine. But they still believe in the biblical general truth, right? And we have tons of discrepancies, and like we disagree with a lot of stuff. But the discrepancies between biblical Christians and Jehovah's Witnesses are dwarfed by difference between biblical Christians and Muslims. It's like there is no way we can even reconcile these two beliefs. Like, I mean, Muslims and Christians. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses is different animal altogether, and it used to be in my opinion, should be we can definitely use different topic and different argument to talk to them. I have also my experience talking to them extensively, like for last 20 plus, almost 30 years. I was here, there,
Right.
talking to them, and I understand the difference. There is no way I could use the same passages when I talk to Muslims.
Yeah.
They're incompatible. Yeah, that's
Yeah, and that is where most Christians are talking to Muslims, is they're using those kind of arguments about the divinity of Christ and the atonement and Trinity and stuff like that. And that's really, we're saying that needs to be held off until we first dismantled the Quran using Old Testament.
yes.
And then the next stage is not gospel, not those theological things yet. We got to then go through Old Testament foundations,
Yeah,
and then gospel, and we can do that general apologetics. But that's at the end, not at the beginning and not in the middle.
Yeah. that's true.
I was reminded of a passage, and maybe I can just share it.
Mhm.
Share my screen. In Galatians 3. Oh, I got kicked out from my laptop, so you got to let me log in for that. Well, I'll just read it.
Okay.
Yeah. So in Galatians 3, starting at verse 23, now before faith came, meaning faith in the Messiah, we were held captive under the law, imprisoned until the coming faith would be revealed. So then the law was our guardian, you could say tutor or teacher, until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith.
Mhm.
But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian, for in Christ Jesus you are all sons of God through faith, etc. So the point is the law, and here we can say the Old Covenant, we can say even the Hebrew Bible, is preparing them for the Messiah. So there are stages and in a development and progression of revelation, where one builds upon what
Yeah.
was before and so on, and ultimately culminates in Christ. So that we see that biblically even argued in the New Testament. So how can we come along and just assert Jesus and try to argue for the evidence about Jesus when there's no framework?
Mhm.
They don't have the same framework to understand and interpret what we're saying in a way that is at all even possibly acceptable to them. It's not viable to them.
Yes. Okay.
And another aspect that's incompatible with our view of Jesus for them is their view of prophethood. So how can, if you compare that with the Jehovah's Witnesses view of Jesus, I mean, these are completely different things. Jesus is not just a man in Jehovah's Witness
He's an
theology
angel.
either, right? He's
Archangel.
Michael the archangel who became a man. So he's the first thing created, and through whom created everything else. I mean, is
Mhm.
that the Islamic view? No.
Yeah, that's-
It's so crazy different. And Jesus in the Islamic view isn't that unique. He's just another prophet. He is one of the higher, like, he's among the top echelon of prophets, but he's not. Yeah. So essentially, that's kind of funny that the Jehovah's Witness view is that Jesus was Michael the Archangel who became a man. That's clearly not the Islamic view. And also, you've got the difference between views of prophethood, where in the Islamic view, Isa or Jesus is not in a class all his own, beyond all the prophets. He's just one of the other prophets. And yes, he is in let's say the top class rank of prophets, but he's not beyond all of the prophets.
Yeah.
He's just one among them. So, like, it's a totally different viewpoint than what Jehovah's Witnesses think, and certainly than what the Bible teaches. So yeah, is there anything else you think we should share
No, I think that's. I think we cover everything what William Lane Craig said.
Oh, you know what? Actually, I thought, no, I was going to say,
Yeah. Okay.
he talked about historical errors in the Quran.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to, I'm going to share, let me just log back in with my laptop here.
Okay.
You can accept me back in now. And then,
Yeah, I could see your laptop.
okay, and then I'll share my screen. And I just wanted to share a couple like common examples that people actually have pointed out are historical errors in the Quran, but are still not what we would focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that that William Lane Craig doesn't even really think of these things. He's just only focused on Jesus on the cross. And here.
Yeah, and how
Here.
we see.
So
it
here
as
we.
an error,
Yeah, go ahead.
and how we see it as an error, but not how Muslim sees it.
Yeah. Now
So it's
they.
like a preaching to the choir. What he does, he's a preaching to the choir, not to the
Yeah,
real
exactly.
guys.
And that's what we're trying not to do, is trying not to just think of how, like, because like I said before, we're coming from two different epistemological standpoints. We're not trying to reason from a historical critical perspective with them. So in Surah 12, Surah Yusuf, ayah 20, it's commonly pointed out that when it says that Joseph was sold, okay, so if you read the clear Quran, it says they sold him for a cheap price, just a few silver coins, right? And it says, if you look here, it says dirhams, okay? So, or if here down here, it uses that word,
And
a
below.
few dirhams in Sahih International.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a Byzantine coin, okay, Byzantine currency. It's not the currency that would have existed in the time of Joseph. So looks like a historical error. Okay, well, let's hold on to that for a second, and then let's go to another example. Also in Surah Yusuf, and verse 41. And we see about the two prisoners that were in prison with Joseph, the cupbearer and the baker. And when Joseph tells them the interpretation of the dreams, he says, "O my fellow prisoners, the first one of you will serve wine to his master, and the other will be crucified. And the birds will eat from his head." Now, crucified, did crucifixion as a practice exist in the time of Joseph? No. It didn't exist for another many hundreds years later. I think it was invented by the Persians. And Joseph is, way before, centuries and centuries before that, even before the time of Moses. And I mean, would crucifixion exist in the time of Moses, do you think?
In time of Moses, I don't think so.
Yeah, so, well, what's interesting is we can go there as well. And 120, Surah 7, ayah 124. And it says about the magicians, the Egyptian magicians, who had a staff throwing contest that turned into snakes with Moses. And it's funny, in the Quran account, they end up believing in the God of Moses, and then Pharaoh threatens them. And here Pharaoh's threatening them, "I will certainly cut off your hands and feet on the opposite sides, and then crucify you all." So that's interesting, even in the time of Moses too. So, okay, these are just few common examples of historical, I would say, inaccuracies. But from what is a Muslim going to say in defense of it? What do you think, Alex?
I will, especially for coins, I would have defend, like when I talk to Christians and argue that you don't use that argument, saying, listen, in the time of Quran, when Quran was speaking, let presumably Allah, or just say correctly, author of the Quran, was talking something people understood.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about illiterate Bedouins, like 7th century. What do they know? Of course, they will be using something which is like a coin, like a drachmas or dirhams.
Yeah.
Something which they commonly understood as and as well, like money wise, right?
Currency, yeah.
Currency, yeah. And crucifixion at that time, everybody knows what it is, right? So therefore, why not to say, instead of hanging, well, I could say crucify, like cruel, like really bad, like death, right? So and it become like more, I think, loaded. Is his story? It's more like severe now looking. So
Yeah.
I won't say anything like it's a big mistake. I won't hold that.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking of another one. So about the crucifixion in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the only place, but in 1 Peter 2, verse 24, we see it says about Jesus, he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you've been healed. So it's describing the death of Jesus dying on a tree, and this is actually alluding to a law in Deuteronomy, where it says, "Cursed is the man who is hanged on a tree." Right? So hanging. Now it doesn't say hanging here, but it's alluding to that passage. So we could say, I think there is another passage that does actually use that. So what are we to say the New Testament's wrong to use that language, even though it knows the practice that was actually done to Jesus was crucifixion. And I actually noticed recently, I know you and I talked about it, is that Josephus in the Antiquities of the Jews and Philo, I think it was in his treatise on Joseph, uses the term, they both use the term crucify, and it is the equivalent of the term that's used in Greek in the New Testament, in their writings also in Greek, for crucify, when it's talking about the cupbearer.
Yeah.
Right? When it also says in Genesis, doesn't say crucify, it says hanged.
Hanged, yeah.
Right? Now, I can say, well, crucifixion is a practice that existed in the time of the first century, which was the time that Josephus and Philo wrote. So I think for them, they could kind of say, well, kind of communicating it to our audience, hanging on a tree, kind of like crucifixion. So, and it's also the cupbearer. Why did he die? It was like a plot against the king, right?
Yeah.
So that's treason.
Yeah.
Treason or insurrection, the punishment for that by the Romans was crucifixion. So that also fits. So I think similar to your point about the coins, it's kind of speaking contextually to the present time.
Exactly.
But it is also kind of compatible with the broader concept that's more ambiguous about hanging. Like, how did he hang? Is, I guess, the question. So I would say I do think that there is kind of a mistake, but I'm not going to push it, because I think we should be allowing for, just as we don't want to use double standards where we're going to defend points, and that, like, one of the things that Muslims always point out is Pharaoh in the time of Joseph.
Yeah.
Right. There were no kings called Pharaoh. Whereas Genesis uses that term, and not just in the time of Joseph, but in Abraham's time in Genesis 12.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we would say, well, that's a literary kind of device or way that Moses, when he was writing the account of Genesis, he used the term in his time, because he's in the time of pharaohs, and he didn't want to name the rulers in Egypt in those times. But he's kind of characterizing them all like the pharaoh in his time, who he also didn't name. So they're all kind of pharaoh. They're all like the bad, tyrannical Egyptian ruler. So if we're going to allow for that explanation, we have to allow for the currency, and the execution practice that we see in the Quran.
So should be fair. We should be fair with them as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I actually do find that when we do that, when I point that out, they typically they really respect that, because we're
Mhm.
not. What I think Christians are doing is they're trying to nitpick everything and defend every point,
Yeah.
and they don't see when they're using a double standard. So we really want to point out when there's double standards and encourage Christians to, follow the golden rule: do unto them as you'd have them do unto you. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I think that's all we got for
Yeah.
today. But yeah, hope you can watch our other videos and learn more about our approach, where we compare Old Testament narratives with Quranic narratives. And
Mhm. Yeah, just the main
yeah.
point is we just not only criticize, we offer something else instead.
Yes.
So that's our motto, so to speak, and we'll
Okay.
go from that. Thank
Yep.
you. See you again.
Thanks for joining us.